Hi, everybody. Jeff Toyster here. I am joined today by Shaun Belding. He's the author of The Journey to Wow, The Path to Outstanding Customer Experience and Loyalty. And I wanted to reach out to Shaun because I really enjoyed the book, but the book also addressed what I think is a very fundamental issue, which is getting all of our executives to care about customer experience. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, Shaun, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
Well, I'm outstanding, Jeff. I've been looking forward to this. Just so much. This is great. Yeah. I wore the shirt for it. Just we talked about that, so we'd match.
We did. We got the shirt memo, and if you're watching you're watching this interview or listening to it, we're both wearing Hawaiian shirts. It was not it was coincidental. It was not planned. That's just how we operate. So that's good to know. So I wanted to start by asking you more of a big picture question, which is, why is this a problem? Or is it even a problem in terms of getting executives to care about customer experience?
I think it is. I think it is. I can't think of very few organizations that I've bumped into the first time I've talked to them, and where I've seen complete alignment with people and people at the executive level, and it's so many people. We've become such a specialized society that you have a CIO. That person looks after all of your information technology, and you have a CMO that looks after marketing, and you have and the silos have become far closer defined than ever before. So, and that's what they're focused on. And we all see the world based on where we stand, right? I mean, what you see comes from where you stand, and I think that causes it causes that misalignment, and it causes people to sort of focus on their area of expertise as opposed to that end goal, which is the customer.
And you mentioned something about goals, which I think is very important. In your experience, do you find that companies have shared goals, or do goals tend to reflect those silos as well in terms of what's important to each team?
I found that most companies have a shared goal,
Okay.
technically, in writing. But when push comes to shove, that's not a driver. I just don't see it as being a driver, and I don't see the structures and the processes, the way the company, even the bonus structures in the company. I don't see them reflecting that. What they would say is that single focus.
Now, you talked about structure as well. I hope I don't put you on too much on the spot with a question. I hear a lot of debate around this, which is, do we need a C-suite level person who is in charge of CX or customer experience, the chief customer experience officer, or someone with CX or customer experience in their title? Is that important? Is it necessary? Should companies do that?
Well, I guess my answer is yes, but I think I have a different definition. Like, we both talked about that. I mean, and there's a lot of people now that have that title, whether they're CXOs or CCXOs, CCO. Like, there's all kinds of titles for it. I don't see the role. I see the role differently. So when I wrote the book, The Journey to Wow, and one of the reasons I wrote it the way I wrote it, as a parable, as a story, was because there's so many. Because when you just write a book on customer service, I say just write a book, like that's really easy to do. But you don't. When you write a book, it's really hard to capture all the nuances, all the realities, and one of the things that I built into it, because is this, and again, it's a fictitious story, but a role of somebody that takes this job as as a chief customer experience officer, and the CEO says this person can override anybody else's decision. This person can come in and say, you need to fix this. So the only person that can override him is the CEO, right? So in a sense, it was elevated, and not from a power point of view, but basically the goal of this role was to span like all the silos, was to be able to look for things where you had conflicts, or just even conflicts people don't know about, where you have conflicting processes, that this person's trying to achieve this, but the policies over here, are working against it. So So yeah, I think it is important, but I think that person has to have the right power, right? And has to have the right. It can't just be like another chief marketing officer, because customer experience isn't a thing, is it? I mean, it's not. It's 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 not. You can't. I don't believe you can have a customer experience campaign like you can with a marketing. I mean, customer experience is a DNA thing. I mean, that's a culture, and that's why I think that it's an important role. But in my mind, I think that it has to be a really broad-reaching role that touches on the whole organization.
So I want to address a couple of things here. One is maybe for people who are listening to this or watching this interview. When I first picked up your book, if I'm being 100% honest, I thought, oh no, not a parable. Is there going to be a mouse or a seagull or a talking bear and because I generally don't gravitate towards those types of books. And I really think you made a smart decision though in writing it as a parable. As a reader, what resonated with me is you captured a realistic situation. There was kind of a critical event for this organization. They were getting a lot of tough feedback. Everybody was pointing fingers kind of at everybody else, or at least staking their own claim, I guess. And the thing that I really felt was a powerful message was this mandate from the CEO. And so for people listening to this, the story really works. Shaun, I think you did a great job of making authentic. And what I wanted to ask you a little bit more about is that role of the CEO. And what does the CEO need to do to get the rest of the team to buy in to their customer experience responsibilities?
I've seen, and again, we've talked about it, I know you have too. I've seen CEOs that have been really successful at it, and the one thing that they have in common every single time is relentlessness, and it's a laser focus, a pinpoint focus. And I think of a company I worked with for a couple of years ago, and it was traditionally very much of a sales-driven company. So they're much more about how do we drive sales, how do we drive ROI, how do we drive EBITDA, those sorts of things. And he came. Now didn't just come in, but he decided we have to become a customer-focused, customer experience-driven thing. He was relentless, and when I mean relentless, there was not a single meeting where he didn't say, what are we doing? What are you doing? Right? This is our goal. Our goal is that we want customers, to have these amazing experiences. What have you done? And he wouldn't accept as an answer, right? He didn't accept wishy-washy answers. And when I say relentless, he was relentless for 2 years. But after the 2 years, this company became, it went from, again, in an industry where you wouldn't expect these kinds of things to happen. They became one of the top 50 employers, won that award, the top 50 employers. Their profitability or gross margin, how they measured it, increased overall by 14%, which is huge, in most industries. He attributes to that, and their employee retention. And that was the other thing, is as they focused on it, because you can't focus on customer experience without focusing on employee experience, because they're so tightly tied, that their retention levels almost doubled. Like it was amazing how they cut their turnover almost in half, is probably a better way to say it.
So one of the themes I'm hearing is that customer experience is holistic. It's tying everything together. Earlier we talked about different silos and having goals that are truly meaningful across different functions, or the impact of customer experience on multiple other outcomes, such as employee experience, retention, profitability, that it's a unifier. The other thing I think that's really interesting is talking about this relentlessness of the chief executive officer and constantly talking about it. From my perspective, I think there's a worry sometimes that does this become a program or a flavor of the month, or does it become, to use what you said earlier, part of our DNA? In your experience, what differentiates something that's just something we're flavor of the month versus something that's truly part of our DNA as an organization?
Well, and again, I I think we've all seen flavors of the month in so many different things. And then I think it's time. Yeah, so I'm going to use this same company just because for me, I mean, it's certainly not the only one we've worked with, and the only one that's had success, but this one was so stark, like from going from kind of black to white. And I remember it was 3 months in, and I was sitting down and having lunch with one of the VPs, somebody who I'd known for a long time. And he said, it was 3 months in, and he said, well, he said, most of the people are just putting in time waiting for it to pass so we can get back to do the things we meant. Well, it didn't. And I think one of the interesting, sad, but interesting, and it makes sense. One of the things that worked was one of the VPs got let go, not for any reason other than the fact that this person had only paid lip service to the customer experience. So and what the CEO was asking, which again sort of makes sense, is that if you think at every level, so you go to the manufacturer, why do we worry about the quality of our goods? Right? So our customers ultimately will, that's part of the experience, is that, how often is it breaking? What's going on? Why do we worry about cost controls? Well, it's so that we can remain competitive and we can provide great value to our customers. So this was somebody that wasn't translating what he was doing to the customer. He did it because, well, for whatever, he had his own reasons, or because that's what he wanted to do. And because of that, he wasn't, when you have everybody translating all their initiatives to one goal, it makes it a whole lot easier to create resonance. And that's the issue with silos, isn't it? I mean, everybody's working hard, I believe. I think most people want to do a good job and work really hard at it. But their goals are vertical, as opposed to diagonal, meeting in that center where you have now that rallying cry. And that was actually the CEO when I was working with him, and he said, you need a rallying cry. That was his big thing. He said, I want that one thing that everybody can tie in and get excited about. And he was right, and it worked.
And I love that you're talking about rallying cries, because I'm in my research in customer-focused organizations, almost universally they have something that's called a customer experience vision or a customer service vision. It goes by different names, and to me that doesn't matter as much as there's one thing that everybody points at every day when we go to work. This is what we're trying to do for our customer, and it unifies everybody. It's the challenge, though, I think sometimes is even that becomes a program or an idea. I talked to an executive recently who wants to create one of those, but first they need to roll out their new survey program. And I'm thinking, well, wait, maybe do it the other way. Maybe start with what you're trying to do and then survey your customers to ask if you're doing it well or not. Is it challenging for companies to understand this concept of a rallying cry, or do you find that the ones that get it just get it? Like, what's been your experience with that?
That one's but it's so true. What happens is, particularly in a large company, well, first of all, Jeff, and when we talked about, you were talking about that because I just had a thought and it sort of ties in. I don't have a lot of thoughts, so I have to get it out. But you talked about how do you keep things from being the flavor of the month. And one of the biggest challenges in a large company, as soon as you get into a public company, you're dealing with quarters. Right? You're dealing with month to month. So imagine you have a chief executive officer that's saying, okay, we're gonna become this world-class customer experience focused organization. It's gonna be part of our DNA. It's gonna make us run, make us smooth. And then all of a sudden somebody says, okay, but that's gonna require an investment in whatever aspects you're doing. How do you justify that investment? Where's the ROI? And I've always said, it's like taking vitamins. Like, what's the ROI of that vitamin you took today? I don't know. But I know that if I keep taking them, the way I'm supposed to take them, ultimately I'm going to be healthier, right? I'm going to do better. And that's the way I look at it. So anyway, but I just, when you talked about, that was I think that's one of the challenges large companies have. And then the other thing is, so going to what you were talking about, how to keep it from being it's not a program, it's a culture. And I think that's the thing is most companies, the larger you get, things become institutionalized. So it has to be a program. You have to put a name on it. And for a few reasons, one of them is the person who takes ownership of it wants to be able to say, I did that, right? That was my program. Um, and now that's maybe a cynical view of it, but that's part of it. But the other thing is that if you don't have a name to the program, how do you allocate a budget to it, right? Or if you don't have a name to the initiative, how do you allocate a budget to it? So I do think that's a challenge, and that's why, I mean, I'm a big believer in finding that either the rallying cry or that single focus where you have to, everybody in the organization has to be able to translate the importance of their job somehow to that, whether it's an accounts payable clerk, an accounts receivable person, somebody that's doing that's stocking the shelves in a retail organization, somebody that's working deep down in a mine. I mean, whatever it is, if customer experience is part of your role, you need to know that role that you play in achieving that. And that requires a belief, if you will, not just from the CEO, but from the vice presidents to the managers, to the assistant managers, to line managers, to foremen. I mean, that people have to just think that way, and that's where the relentlessness comes in. And that's where you need to have somebody. Again, like I talk about this one CEO that would just every time they'd have a board meeting and somebody, and I'd sit in on a bunch of these things, and somebody would bring it, not a board meeting, I'm sorry, a senior leadership meeting, and somebody would say, well, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and we think this is going to achieve, this ROI, and here's what and he said, okay, so, and he'd look at him and say, so what? And the first couple of times he did it, people would give him that deer in the headlights look. Well, what do you mean, so what? I just told you, just like and he said, well, why would the customer care about that? And again, for the first few times he did it, the executives, and these weren't stupid, these were good people. Like, these are really solid, smart people. But they'd sit back and okay. And they were able to articulate it, of course. But what they learned was that's where you have to start, not where you have to defend it. And then it's getting that sort of mentality through an organization.
So, Shaun, I know we're running a little short on time, but I want to ask you an important question. Your book, in the title, it talks about, the word journey is used. You talked about being relentless. And I think sometimes people can get overwhelmed. There's so much to do. There's so many directions to take. There's so much work to be performed. For people who are listening in, what would you say would be one step that they could take today to start that journey, to embark on that process?
And that's a fantastic question. And I believe there is one thing. And it's a little bit unusual. Most companies won't do this. And in the book, and again, just quickly, so it was a journey. So the main character in the book started off as a design engineer and claimed to know nothing about customer experience. So he had to go through the journey. And of course, that was how I detailed it. But one of the places where it ended up, and I believe that if you did this, any company that did this right now, you would start seeing a difference in mindset, and you would start seeing a difference in results and activity within 2 weeks. And I would guarantee it, money back, whatever you paid me for this, I'll give that money back if I'm lying. So if you have a customer database, any company, if you have a customer database, take that database, let's just take 1,000 names of the database. And if you have 20 senior people, give each senior person 50 names. You have to make a telephone call, not an email, not a text. You have to pick up the phone and call that person and just introduce yourself and say, hi, my name's Shaun. I work for this company. You're on our customer database. And I just wanted to talk and see how, tell me, how do you like stuff? Not a formal thing. I don't want to create a report. I want people to talk to customers, because that's the one thing where we fail. We get so reliant on reports and studies and surveys and things, and we lose sight of the human being. Once you get, what's really interesting, because again, a couple of our clients have started doing this, and the results are off the charts. what what happens is all of a sudden you have a senior leadership meeting after you've been doing this for 2 weeks, and the meeting hasn't started yet. Guess what everybody's talking about? They're talking about old Mr. Jones that I spoke to on the phone, and oh yes, and there's Phyllis from Milwaukee, and there's so and so from such and such, and I had 3 people tell me we needed to do this, and and all of a sudden, like, that conversation comes by itself, because now by simply having those conversations, everybody has, it doesn't matter what silo you're in, what your role is, you have a common thing to talk about, and that common thing is the customer. So there it is.
That's fantastic advice, Shaun. And one of the things I've seen over and over again, if you need to communicate with executives, of course you need to bring the data and the business case, but you need to make it personal. And talking to customers is a fantastic way to make it personal. I'm so glad we got a chance to connect today. If people want to connect with you and find the book, which they should, how do they do that?
Well, probably Twitter. So if somebody looks up Shaun.Belding, it's SHAUN.Belding on Twitter. And then pretty much anything else with Shaun Belding in it, you can find me. Please buy lots of my books. I still have like at least one child university. I've got to put them through. So, but no, that would be awesome. And even if anybody has any thoughts, questions, or, you know, I love stories. I love hearing stories. So anybody has any really interesting stories that I can steal, I would love that.
Shaun, thanks so much for your time today. Everyone listening, please go out, check out The Journey to Wow. Highly recommend it. And again, Shaun, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.